So how did humans first spread across the Americas? I mean, it's just one of the most incredible stories, right? A journey over thousands of years, huge distances.
Absolutely. And ancient DNA is, well, it's letting us uncover whole new chapters in that story now.
Yeah, finding populations, movements, things we didn't even know about before.
That's right. And there's one place that's absolutely critical for understanding this whole migration picture.
You mean that narrow connection between North and South America?
Exactly, the isthmus. Think of it like the ultimate gateway, to the entire southern continent.
A real choke point, a crucial pathway. And today, we're actually diving deep into some really groundbreaking new info from right there, from that gateway region.
We are. We're looking at insights from a recent article and also the main scientific paper behind it, published in Science Advances.
And the focus is this fascinating new study using ancient DNA from archaeological sites high up on the plateaus near Bogota, Colombia, the Altiplano.
That's the one. Our mission, really, is to unpack what these ancient genes are telling us about the people living there thousands of years ago.
Because it seems the DNA reveals some surprising shifts and unexpected connections.
It really does.
Okay, so maybe let's just quickly set the scene. The general story we know is humans enter North America first, likely from Asia, right? And then start moving south.
That's the basic framework, yeah. Following resources, opportunities spreading out.
And as these early groups moved, maybe split off, they started developing their own distinct genetic signatures, like family markers that scientists can track.
Precisely. Across continents,
Yeah.
and crucially, through time, using ancient DNA.
And the established picture, sort of the textbook version, has been that a major ancestral split happened somewhere in North America, maybe around 16,000 years ago, give or take.
Right, one branch stayed more northern, leading to northern Native American lineages we see.
And the other branch, the Southern Native American lineage, that's the one that moved south and diversified, became the main source for people spreading through Central and South America.
That's been the prevailing model. That this southern lineage branched out into different sublineages, arriving in South America perhaps in waves. Previous studies showed different pulses of ancestry, but all stemming from that main southern branch.
Okay, here's where this new study from the Bogota Altiplano really flips the script.
It does, yeah. Using ancient DNA analysis, these researchers identified a group of hunter-gatherers living right there on the Altiplano about 6,000 years ago.
That nobody knew about before.
Pretty much, yes, a previously unknown group.
Wow. And where exactly were they found?
On those high plateaus near modern Bogota, the study mentioned sites like Checua specifically.
And the key thing is their DNA, right? It tells a different story.
A very different story. The analysis using these quite sophisticated statistical methods, like F-statistics and QPGraph.
Which let you compare DNA variations and model population histories.
Exactly. They allow you to see how closely related different groups are. And this analysis showed this 6,000-year-old group was genetically, well, highly distinct.
Distinct from whom?
They weren't closely related to the ancient North American populations in the way you'd expect if they were just part of that main southern lineage expansion.
Okay.
And maybe more importantly, they also weren't linked in the expected ways to other ancient or present-day South American populations that had been studied genetically before this paper.
So, where do they fit in the family tree then, if they're not fitting the standard model?
Well, based on the genetics, the study suggests they represent a previously unknown basal lineage.
Basal meaning branching off early.
Exactly. Imagine that first wave of humans expanding into Central and South America like the trunk of a tree. This group seems to branch off very, very early from that trunk.
So they're kind of an outgroup, sitting outside the main branches that led to most other known indigenous South American groups.
That's how the analysis positions them, yes. They derived from that initial peopling radiation, but they took a separate genetic path that we just hadn't detected before.
Which explains why other experts called this finding unexpected.
Completely unexpected. It suggests the initial peopling of South America was probably more complex, with more early branching diversity than we'd previously assumed.
It adds another layer, another independent branch right at the beginning.
A significant layer, definitely. Especially for understanding those very first movements south of the isthmus.
Okay, so we have this unique ancient group on the Altiplano 6,000 years ago. But then the story takes another twist, a mysterious one.
It does. Because if you fast forward in the archaeological record to about 2,000 years ago,
What happens?
the genetic picture on the Altiplano looks completely different. The DNA we get from individuals dating to around 2,000 years ago shows a total replacement.
Replacement. You mean that earlier unique 6,000-year-old lineage It's gone.
From the samples they have from the Altiplano at that time, yes, it's no longer detectable in that specific region.
Wow. So, like, they just vanished. Do we know what happened?
That's the big question. The scientists aren't sure. Did they move somewhere else and maybe assimilate into a larger group we haven't sampled?
Or were they pushed out somehow? Maybe by the people who did arrive.
It's possible. All we know for sure from this data is that a major genetic turnover event happened sometime between 6,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago.
But the why and the where did they go,
So
those are still mysteries.
exactly. It really highlights the need for more research, more sampling in nearby areas and across that time gap.
Okay, so that brings us to the people who are there from 2,000 years ago onwards, this new ancestry. Where did it come from?
The genetic analysis, using tools like admixture, which kind of teases apart different ancestry components,
Right.
and also those statistics, again, they showed a really clear picture. This incoming genetic profile is closely related to populations from Central America.
Yeah, Central America, and that this lines up with anything else happening in the region at the time, archaeologically.
Oh, absolutely. And this is incredibly compelling. This new genetic signature appears right around the time we see a new type of pottery showing up on the Altiplano.
You mean the Herrera ceramics?
Exactly. The Herrera ceramic complex, which is found from about 2800 BP up to maybe 1200 BP. The timing fits remarkably well.
So the genetics strongly suggest that this new pottery wasn't just, a local invention or an idea spreading.
But likely came with people moving into the area. It supports a model of population dispersal, bringing this new cultural package.
That challenges some older ideas, doesn't it? Based on like skull shapes or certain mitochondrial DNA lines.
It does. Some earlier studies suggested more local continuity, but this genomic data points quite clearly towards a population movement from Central America being linked to the Herrera phenomena.
And I think the study mentioned something similar happening elsewhere too, in Venezuela.
Yes, good point. Individuals associated with early ceramics in Venezuela, dating a bit earlier, maybe 2400 BP, they also show a genetic link to Central American populations, specifically Chibchan speakers.
Okay, so a pattern emerging.
But interestingly, the genetics suggest the ancient Venezuelans and these ancient Colombians from the Altiplano weren't simple sister groups. They didn't branch off immediately from each other.
Meaning?
Well, it might mean there were potentially different waves or maybe different routes of migration coming out of Central America into various parts of Northern South America around that time, not just one single event.
Fascinating. But the overall thrust is a significant movement from Central America, linked to Chibchan speakers.
Yes, that's the strong signal. The people on the Altiplano after 2000 BP show a very robust genetic connection to modern groups who speak Chibchan languages.
Especially those from lower Central America, Costa Rica, Panama.
That's where the strongest affinities lie in the analyses, yes.
This must have pretty big implications for understanding how Chibchan languages themselves spread, right?
Huge implications. This genetic data provides really strong support for a linguistic model that proposes Chibchan languages, or at least the ancestries associated with them, originated in that lower Central America Isthmus region.
And then spread out from there.
Kind of bidirectionally, yeah. North into parts of Mesoamerica and south into South America. And linguistically, the greatest diversity within the Chibchan language family is found right there in the Isthmus area.
Which often suggests an origin point, a homeland.
Exactly. So the genetics and the linguistics seem to be telling a similar story here.
Okay, so we have this major turnover around 2,000 years ago. Central American ancestry arrives. But then the study found something else quite remarkable after that point.
Yes, stability. Quite striking genetic stability.
Meaning?
For over 1,500 years, think about that, 15 centuries, from at least 2000 BP right up until about 500 BP, so basically just before Spanish colonization. The genetic profile of the people living on the Altiplano remained remarkably continuous, stable.
But wait, were there big cultural changes happening during that time? You mentioned the Herrera period ending and then the Muisca culture developing, the one the Spanish encountered.
Absolutely. Big cultural shifts are visible in the archaeology. The end of Herrera, the entire Muisca period.
But the genetics didn't change significantly during that transition.
Apparently not. The data suggests there wasn't another large-scale migration bringing a new, distinct ancestry that replaced the existing population during that time.
So the rise of the Muisca culture seems to have been more of an internal development, culturally speaking, not driven by new people arriving.
That's what this genetic continuity strongly implies. The people themselves, genetically, were largely the same population carrying forward from the Herrera period into the Muisca period.
Which also suggests, what about language?
Well, it implies that ancestral Chibchan languages were almost certainly being spoken on the Altiplano during that earlier pre-Muisca Herrera period. It wasn't just the Muisca language arriving later. The linguistic roots were likely already there.
Okay, so that paints the ancient picture. But how does all this connect to people living in Colombia today? Are those ancient Altiplano people direct ancestors to all modern indigenous groups there?
It's, as usual, a bit more complex than a straight line. While those post-2000 BP ancient Altiplano folks are clearly linked to Central American Chibchan speakers, their genetic connection is actually sort of reduced or diluted when compared to many modern indigenous groups in Colombia.
Even groups that speak Chibchan languages today.
Yes, even some Chibchan-speaking groups in Colombia show less direct affinity than you might expect.
The sources mention something called the Chibchan archipelago. What's that about?
Yeah, that term describes a situation at the time of European contact. Chibchan-speaking groups weren't occupying one single solid block of territory. Instead, they were found in kind of scattered pockets, fragmented across the Istmo-Colombian area, like islands in an archipelago.
Okay, so the genetics can help us understand why that pattern might exist.
Potentially, yes. Was it because there were multiple separate waves of migration from Central America landing in different spots? That's one idea.
Plausible.
But another explanation, which this genetic data seems to support, is that maybe an initially wider spread of this Chibchan-related ancestry got broken up later on.
How would that happen?
Through later movements of other populations into the region, perhaps, or through local admixture, mixing between the Chibchan-related groups and other incoming peoples.
So later events reshape the map.
It seems likely. That reduced genetic link between the ancient Altiplano people and some of the modern northern Colombian groups suggests that subsequent admixture played a really significant role in creating the genetic diversity we see today in northern South America.
It's just layers upon layers of movement and mixing.
It really is. And it's worth noting that other lines of evidence archaeology showing cultural contacts, shared styles, and things like gold work, even historical accounts, they generally align with this picture of complex interactions and movements of Chibchan groups. The genetics adds a powerful new dimension.
But this study, while revealing so much, also points out things we don't know yet, right? Limitations.
Oh, absolutely. The authors are clear about that. They emphasize needing higher resolution genetic data, ideally whole genome sequencing.
Getting the entire genetic code, not just snapshots.
Exactly. Whole genomes give you much finer detail to trace relationships, detect subtle admixture, and build more robust models. The current study mostly used targeted SNP data, which is powerful, but whole genomes are the next level.
And more samples, presumably.
Definitely. More samples through time, especially within that 6,000 to 2,000 year gap on the Altiplano, could help pinpoint exactly when and maybe how that major population replacement occurred.
And samples from nearby regions, too.
Crucial. Getting ancient DNA from Western Colombia, Western Venezuela, Ecuador, it's essential to build a bigger picture. To understand the migration routes, the timing, the extent of admixture across the entire Istmo-Colombian area, it's a huge interconnected puzzle.
So this study is like a really important anchor point, but it also opens up so many more questions.
That's a great way to put it. It provides key insights, but definitely fuels the desire for more research.
Okay, so let's just quickly recap the main takeaways from this deep dive.
Yep.
We started with this really unexpected discovery.
Right. A unique, previously unknown ancient human lineage living on the Bogota Altiplano around 6,000 years ago, a key location.
And then sometime before 2,000 years ago, that distinct lineage was completely replaced.
Replaced by a new ancestry, one strongly linked to Central America and specifically to populations associated with Chibchan languages.
And then, perhaps just as surprising, this new genetic profile showed remarkable stability, continuity for over 1,500 years after that.
Yep, lasting right through major cultural shifts that we see in the archaeology, like the transition from the Herrera period to the Muisca period.
It really drives home how ancient DNA can reconstruct these incredibly complex stories of migration, replacement, and continuity that were, well, pretty much invisible before.
It challenges older models, refines our understanding, and sometimes, like here, adds completely new elements to the narrative of how the Americas were peopled.
Yeah.
It's like finding lost chapters.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other lost lineages, what other migration stories are still buried in the past, waiting for ancient DNA to uncover them?
Especially in these really pivotal regions, like the Istmo-Colombian area. If we can find a whole new basal lineage and a complete population turnover in this one spot, well, what else is waiting in that gateway region? It suggests the full story of human history on the continent is likely even richer and more complex than we can currently imagine.